Nick, firstly, thank you for your time. It's Rugby World Cup time again. The memories of 1991, do they still remain pretty close to you?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I suppose it's a long time ago, but yeah, aspects of it very much so. Particularly the 2 weeks we had in Dublin, which I loved. I mean, we had the great escape against Ireland and then a terrific match against the All Blacks, but they were a great 2 weeks. I very much enjoyed that. I just had my first child too, or at least my wife had, and they were over there, so Jess was only about 2 months old. So that was all pretty special, and and it was great to have Ange and my daughter there. And then the build up to the London match, that was very memorable. It was a lot of pressure, and all of a sudden when the tournament has come down to two teams, there's a hell of a lot of media focus on those teams. So it was very enjoyable, but it was a lot of pressure at the same time as a captain of that team. I think the lasting memory for me is just having been a part of the inaugural World Cup, where I just don't think it really captured the imagination of certainly the Australians. It probably did the Kiwis because they won it and daylight came second. But I sort of look back at that semi-final against the French. Amazing game, terrific game, and there were 4,000 empty seats at Concord Oval. Capacity of 23,000 people. So I think from the outstanding memory I have from '91 was just how much interest it was seeming to generate as we got thousands of faxes would roll into the hotel in those days leading into the final from people from all over the country, people who really didn't understand the game, just wishing us well. And then I suppose the final confirmation was getting home to have the Premier of New South Wales, Nick Greiner, say we're going to put on a ticker tape parade, and I was really anxious and nervous that a few hundred people had turned up, that couple of kilometres from Circular Quay to Town Hall. And I was very anxious that this would be a dud. I mean, you didn't have it in those days, 24 years ago in amateur sport. But we had about 130,000 people reportedly turned up, and I've just had breakfast or a cup of coffee with my vice captain Michael Liner, who's lived in London now for nearly 20 years, and Noddy's back to launch his book, having had his stroke, and I'll never forget sitting alongside Noddy with the trophy, the Webb Ellis Cup, as we went up George Street, and just gobsmacked by that level of support. So to me, that was the sort of defining memory of the World Cup. How many Aussies, sometimes with non-rugby backgrounds, just got behind the team.
Yeah, great. September 18, it all kicks off. The big question being, how do you think the Wallabies will go?
Look, it's early days in the Rugby Championship. I mean, as you say, we're literally 6-7 weeks away from kickoff. So Michael Checker obviously hasn't had a hell of a lot of time to prepare this team. Spring tour, he would have been disappointed. It's going to be a hell of a pool to get out of. We've never not made it to the quarterfinal stage. I think World Cups for Australia are considered a bit of a failure if you don't get beyond the quarterfinals. We've done that a few times, 95, and then 2007 we lost both to England in quarterfinals. But to not get out of a pool would be pretty horrific for the game. But at the same time, I understand the magnitude of the challenge that Checker and Steve Moore have got. It's England at home are really, really hard. They know that they can turn the Bunsen burner up on our perceived Achilles heel, and it probably is our Achilles heel, the scrum. It cost us the match against England in 2007. The thing I love about the game is that it's an inclusive game. There's a position for everyone. And if the number 1, 2 and 3 aren't doing their job, it's damn hard for me, the number 9, to do my job. And I think it's a great thing about the game. Everyone has to contribute for everyone to be able to do their part. Do your job, minimise the errors, trust 14 guys around you to do their job. At the end of the 80 minutes, look up and see what the scoreboard tells you. But that is where both England and Wales will know that they can really turn the heat up on us. And whether we can confront that and match it, that's going to be the big test. And then Checker's got to work out the balance in the line-out such that, we do get a good balance of possession, hopefully going forward at breakdown. And, it's going to be tough because Wales, yes, we've beaten them regularly in the last 4 or 5 years, but again at Twickenham. I know it's not their home, but it's a huge cauldron, and they will know. I mean, Gatlin, their coach, is a very shrewd coach, and he will know as a guy who played in the All Black squad. He was behind Sean Fitzpatrick, but a guy who understands scrummaging so well. He'll know how important that scrum will be, and they're going to turn up as I said, the heat on us, and I just hope we're well prepared for that.
You mentioned the coach, Michael Checker. Do you think he's the man to take the Wallabies forward?
Oh, look, I think he's as good as we've got. There's no doubt about that. I mean, look, you can't get out and do it yourself. I think Michael has got a great capacity to build a spirit within a team that, he's got, I think, from a distance, a good communication with the guys. They respect him. I mean, they're all very important, parts of what you bring to a team as a coach. So, I felt for Ewan when he lost the job, but Michael was the right guy to come into that void and take this forward. And with limited time with the team, if anyone can do it, Cheika can do it.
To go through the pool games, then the semi-finals, and come out the other side holding the trophy aloft, does it take more than just talent to get to that stage?
Oh, look, it takes a whole lot of things. I mean, we had to change the culture of the team in the late 80s. And we did, from a team that we called a scoreboard-focused team, desperate to win, to a team that understood process. And I've basically just explained a little bit of that. Do your job. Goes way beyond the 80 minutes, of course, but do your job, minimise the errors. Try and ignore the scoreboard. It's damn difficult when you're playing a big match in a World Cup. But get the process right, and we found that the scoreboard looked after itself. We became a very consistent team, and we became the best team in the world in the early 90s. But the talent you can't ignore. I mean, Bob Dwyer, my second national coach, our coach in 91, I think he was right when he said that to win a World Cup you need 5 guys that have picked themselves in a World 15, automatic selections almost, 5 guys on the fringe of that team, and then 5 tried and true guys who won't let you down. And you can look at the makeup of the Wallabies. Do we have that? I suspect we wouldn't have 5 guys that are in a World 15. At the end of, come 31 October, let's hope that all the rugby scribes are saying, well, geez, didn't that guy step up, and wouldn't he be a natural selection? It doesn't mean that we can't win it, but you're going to have a bunch of probably young guys really step up to the plate and stamp themselves as wonderful players and guys that would, be considered in that World 15 team. And that's possible. The World Cup is potentially 7 matches. It's possible for someone to rise and particularly young guys that can really put their mark on the game.
Yeah, sure. In April this year, there was a dramatic shift in the ARU's eligibility policy with overseas-based players. What's your view on the overhaul of the policy?
Yeah, look, I think it's a sensible thing. I really didn't know Matt Giddo. When I stopped rugby, I went and lived in France for 4 years. I joined a French bank. A sort of umbilical cord was cut. I really didn't get to know some of these guys, but I sat next to Matt during the Lions series. He came out from France, and I just was very impressed by his maturity, that he seemed to mature. He had a couple of kids. I had no idea he'd played 93 tests for Australia. I mean, it's amazing. And he talked to me about his passion and love to pull on the gold jersey again. And when you look at how well he's done in Europe, and the player of the tournament in Europe, or at least the player of the season for Toulon, you quickly get an appreciation of how well he must be going, how consistently well he must be playing, what a ball player he must be. He's played at Twickenham a number of times. When you're sitting in that changing room just before you get that final knock on the door, you want to look around your room and see guys in your coloured jersey that have been there, done that have played at this stadium and have risen to the occasion. I think it's very sensible to change the policy. And it's not for guys to be able to go early in the season. I always root for young guys that maybe get badly advised by player agents to go for the big dollars when they're 22, 23. I always think that they're going to one day regret the fact that they left Australia, left the opportunity to pull on that gold jersey, to build out your anthem in great stadiums. The money's important, but it's not as if you don't get good money playing for Australia. So I'm all for guys getting that experience to travel to Europe or to Japan to earn good dollars, because they've got to set up themselves financially in those days of professional sport. But I think having to play, I think it's 60 tests, is it, for Australia before you then become eligible? I think that's a very sensible thing. I think once you've done that 60 test matches, go and experience the world, but still have the ability to be picked for Australia if you're playing well enough and you're passionate about it. So I think it's a very sensible policy, and Bill Pulver and his board at the Australian Rugby Union should be congratulated for giving it the flexibility. I have no doubt that Michael Cheika would have put a little bit of pressure on St Leonard's, but it's a sensible decision.
To play devil's advocate, can you potentially see the quality of Super Rugby, and I guess more specifically Super Rugby in Australia, diminishing because of the new dispensation rules?
Look, it's important to have marquee players, and that's why we're able to pay marquee players. But at the same time, there's, I look around at what's happening here in Sydney, in the Sydney Rugby Union Premiership. We've, of course, got now the National Rugby Championship. There's a great depth of players. I mean, I think there's a lot of guys that could step up to Super Rugby. And so I don't have a problem with that. I think it can open doors for younger guys to be contracted to play professional rugby for the likes of Waratahs or the other 4 franchises. So I don't have a problem with that. But I do understand that, bums on seats are really important. I'm chairman of New South Wales Rugby, so the economics are important. And often you need those marquee players that will get the young kid pulling on dad's, sort of jacket or mum's, sort of frock to say, I want to go and watch Izzy and that sort of stuff. So the marquee players are important, but a balance is sensible.
And just finally, Nick, the overall direction of rugby in Australia at the moment, how do you think the code is stacking up in comparison to other rival codes?
Look, it'd be wrong and foolhardy to say we're doing wonderfully well. There's a lot better things we can do. But I suppose without looking for excuses, and I've been meeting a lot with Bill, so the Chief Executive of Australian Rugby Union, it's well known that the last 3 years it's been basically keeping the game out of administration. We've had a broken balance sheet. Now, whose fault that is, we're not going to point fingers and what have you, but we probably didn't spend money wisely, some years ago, when we, post-Rugby World Cup, when we had a windfall of funds. And I do know that the Australian Rugby Union will have a restored balance sheet next year. I mean, Pulver has been able to negotiate very favourable broadcasting rights, which are just about concluded as we sit here towards the end of July. That'll effectively double the broadcasting income that the Australian Rugby Union has. And, I think Bill sensibly is putting together a framework that will make sure that there'll be an emergency or a fund available in difficult times. So he's looking to basically have $2 million a year over the next 5 years contributed to that fund. He's also increasing the funding to Super Rugby, so that hopefully those super franchises won't be sort of living by the smell of an oily rag every day of their life, and concerns of going concern. But very, very importantly, he's looking to tip a significant amount of money into the game nationally for participation, for growth, for women's, for sevens, all the areas where we've struggled to invest of late. And look, you don't have to be Einstein to know that there's a lot of people disgruntled in Australian community rugby. Wonderful stakeholders, volunteers who give their blood, sweat and tears for the game, and thinking that the last few years the Australian Rugby Union hasn't been interested in them, they're only interested in the professional game. I can tell you that's not the case. We just haven't had the money to spend. A lot of that money will be flowing back in. We have meetings with all the affiliates, so juniors countries, suburban, Premiership Rugby, at the moment saying, guys, you tell us how we best spend the money. How do we best get greater participation? How do we better get women playing the game? How do we increase sevens and juniors and minis and all this sort of thing? So Bill's not just going to write cheques willy-nilly. It's got to be properly managed. It's got to get the best bang for the buck. But I think people come 2016 will start to see hopefully a difference. We're up against a lot of great competition who've got a lot more money than we have. The AFL do it wonderfully well, trying to recruit players, win minds and hearts. Rugby league do it quite well, and football's a terrific game too. And so the competition's tough. Can we do it better? Absolutely. Will we do it better? I'm very confident we will.
Well, Nick, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Not a problem. Cheers.